Well, since we taped that show with Sonia Firstino, there's been an interesting development here in BC on the legal front regarding the actual future or validity of the referendum. The Independent Contractors and Business Association of BC, a group that represents over 2,300 companies here in the province, joined by a few other parties, have submitted a legal claim to the BC Supreme Court calling into question the very regulations upon which the referendum campaign and the funding for groups and the very questions themselves on the mail-in ballot are being put into question on some legal grounds. The questions are, first of all, are the regulations that were passed by Cabinet back in June, are they consistent with the actual objectives and purpose of the legislation? That's the Electoral Reform Referendum Act of 2018. That was passed last fall in the legislature by the NDP and Green support. That allows the referendum to be carried out this year, as we know. The regulations actually then provided the details as to what the questions would be, what kind of length of the campaign, the rules regarding advertising, spending limits, and how much groups could spend on the campaign. Some of the arguments that are being put forth to the court to consider are that the regulations are not consistent with the actual purpose of the legislation. The claimants are arguing that the ballot questions are not really a clear expression of the purpose of the act, that they're not going to provide voters with a clear enough and distinct enough sense of what the questions are, and that a majority of voters will not really be in full understanding of what the implications are of voting yes to PR and choosing one or more and ranking one or more of the options on the ballot. Some of the other arguments are even more provocative, are that the regulations are inconsistent with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In other words, the claims being made that the regulations are unconstitutional, contravening fundamental laws of the country. The arguments there are quite interesting. I won't get into all the details, but they concern, first of all, are the rules under the regulations regarding spending limits for third-party organizations and for the opponent and proponent groups that are each being given $500,000 for the 5-month campaign, and then there are $200,000 limits for third-party groups. Are these unduly restrictive or too tight for groups to be able to actually convey in that time period the information on the options, the pros and the cons? The arguments by these claimants to the Supreme Court of BC is that this isn't enough time and that the spending limits are too restrictive and offend Section 2 of the Canadian Charter of Rights on freedom of expression. They're also arguing that the rules are a restriction on freedom of association, that these third-party groups cannot work more closely with political parties in the province, and arguing also that the rules are so complicated in registering and having to contact the electoral chief officer of the province around having staff and a lawyer and an auditor and an accountant, that these are undue, excessive red tape that actually is going to frustrate groups to be able to freely associate and freely express themselves during the campaign. These are not frivolous claims or arguments. The question, though, is now that we're underway in the campaign, is when the court would actually hear this rather serious set of charges or claims against the actual foundations of the referendum. What the group's asking for, that's put forward this claim, is to have the Cabinet decision quashed. In other words, that the regulations be ruled void and null. Also then telling the Chief Electoral Officer to not move forward in carrying out the implementation of the referendum regulations so that they would not be getting any public information. Basically hitting the pause button on the referendum. I think that's a rather dramatic scenario. What we might see, though, is a debate or a clash of arguments between government lawyers and lawyers representing these interest groups who want to question the very foundation of the referendum, its process, the funding restrictions, and the questions themselves. And for those who thought that the summer was going to be a quiet time when not much was going to be heard about proportional representation or the campaign or the ballot question, well, this legal challenge is, I think, guaranteed that this should become a major focus of interest and debate in this province over the coming weeks and months. So this is fundamental to the referendum, and we will keep you appraised in coming shows as to how this plays out. Thank you very much.